move on to our next topic, which is topic 7, internal control system. So these are the outlines that we would like to cover in our topic. So the first one is definition, objective, components of internal control, characteristics of good internal control, inherent limitation, importance of internal control to management and also to the auditors, and then the relationship of internal control and audit evidence, and assessment and documenting understanding of clients' internal control. So how the auditors evaluate and document all the internal control system of the company that they audit, and then evaluation of the client's internal control. After they assess, now they have to evaluate, and then the last one is management letter. Alright, definition and objective. So internal control is actually the process designed and implemented by those charged with governance, management and other personnel to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of the entity's objective concerning financial reporting. So you can see the highlight, the bold one is a process designed and implemented. So it's actually what the rules and procedures has been designed and has been implemented in the business. For what reason? To make sure that the reasonable assurance that related the entity's objective concerning for the financial reporting. So make sure that all they have in the system that they have in a company to make sure that they achieve the objective of the company, especially related to the financial. So next one will be internal control. This system is designed and implemented to address business risks that threaten any of these objectives, including. So this is the internal control system, why they have to design and implement it, right, to address the business risk. So number one, that related with reliability and the entity's financial reporting. So the control system is designed to make sure that whether they can rely or not rely on the financial reporting of the company, and then the effectiveness and the efficiency of the entity's operation. If the system is effective or not effective, all right, efficient or not, so we can see from the internal control system, all right, of the operation. If the system is good, so it means that operation should be effective. All right, compliance with the applicable laws and regulations. So we can see whether the system comply with the rules and regulations or not. All right, components of internal control. So here the company may design the control. So this is provided by the Committee of Sponsoring Organization, COSO, alright, of the Tradeway Commission, which is broken into 5 parts. So the internal control system has been break down into 5 parts. Number 1, the control of the environment. Number 2 is risk assessment. Number 3 is control activities, information and communication, and last one is monitoring. We are going to have a look the components one by one in detail, 1 to 5. Alright, the control environment. So here includes governance and the management of overall attitudes, awareness and actions regarding internal control system and its importance in the entity. So you can see here from the management, about the management attitude, how do they react, how do they perceive, how do they actually aware or not of the internal control system, whether they can take it serious or not take it serious. Alright, the control environment sets the tone of the entity. So this one is actually, you can see whether the tone of the entity, whether they are really emphasized or not emphasized, and it influence the control consciousness of all personnel and is the foundation of other components. So it means that here is really a system that whether they are really concerned, conscious on the system or not. If they are really conscious on the system, it shows that this is a good implementation or foundation for other components, right? For other effectiveness or something doing in the business. It started from the internal control system. So the element should be included with communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. How do they communicate the enforcement taken by the company? Commitment to competence. How did they commit related with the control? And then are they competence? It means that they are knowledgeable enough to do this one. They are, have the knowledge or not, right? Participation by those charged with governance. We can see whether they are participating in this one or not. Is that only a small segment in the business, or the whole departments of the business really take care of it? Next one, the management philosophy and operating style. So we can see whether the philosophy of the management and the operating style. Do they follow the rules, not the rules, or they can override the rules? Is there any rules? Is there any procedures they can follow, or they don't have? All right, next one will be the organizational structure. We can see the organizational structure. So we can see the things is the task given to the the task given to the staff, the task given to the workers, and so on. So from the organizational chart, we can see all this one. All right, assignment of authority and responsibilities. So we can see also the responsibilities of the staff, and then the human resource policies and practices, right? We can see the policies also, which is doing by the staff. All right, number 2, the next one will be the risk assessment. So risk assessment is actually we would like to assess the risk of the business. All right, it's a way of identifying and responding to the business risk. Business risk is the risk from the business itself. All right, so once identified, management needs to consider their significance and how it should be managed. So for example, if they have a risk, so how the management consider, and then the action, how they manage with the risk, and so on. So management might introduce plan, programs, or action to address specific risks, or may accept a risk on a cost benefit. So it means that here they should have basically, for the best thing is they should have the all programs for all those action, and also the procedures by the staff. But it's actually, if the cost is too high, so what we can do is actually address specific risk, or maybe accept a risk on a cost benefit. So it means that they may reduce according to which one is important, if they don't have enough fund. All right, next one will be components of internal control, will be information and communication system. So information includes accounting system, which comprises the method, record to initiate record process and report, exchange transaction and relevant events and condition, and to maintain accountability for other related assets, liabilities, and equity. So how do they communicate? How do they is actually record and everything? So information system is the infrastructure such as hardware, physical components, software, people, and data, whether if the company is using manual or IT. All right, for the effective information system, so should consider the following. All right, identify and all records are valid transaction. So if the information system is good, we can identify and make sure that all transactions are valid. Resolve incorrect processing transaction. So it means that if there is any incorrect processing, so how they can resolve the problems. All right, process and account of the system override. So it means that how do they process, and then whether the system can be override by someone else, or who are the person who are entitled to override. All right, next one will be transfer information from transaction processing system to the GL. So how is actually all those transaction has been processed before they transfer to general ledger. All right, capture information relevant to financial reporting for events and condition other than transaction. So this one also you have to capture all the relevant information. It's not necessarily related to the transaction of the account only. All right, next one, present transaction and related disclosure properly in the financial reporting. So make sure that all this disclosure that required to be reported should be reported. Alright, number 4 is control activities. So control activities here, policies and procedures established by management in order to ensure that its directives are carried out. So make sure that they have the policies, they have the procedures to make sure that the direction of the company is in a good condition. Alright, so control activity should be distinguished from the accounting system. So the controlling and the accounting system should be distinguished, not be the one. The controlling activities is for the whole company, and the accounting system is only part of the activities of the company. So the controlling should be overall. So control activities are added to ensure accounting system procedures accurate and reliable data. So if the company have the control activities, so all the accounting system of course should be in a good. So all the information can be accurate and more reliable. Alright, categories of the control activities, alright, will include the following. Number 1 is segregation of duties. It means that one person not doing all of the duties. So they must have a segregation of duties, or two different person doing the job, which is, for example, for the person doing the job do transaction and the person who authorized the transaction. If like we can see here, the authorization of duties here, make sure that the person who authorized also must be different person, to make sure that that one cannot be manipulated by the staff. Alright, adequate documentation and record. Make sure that everything that recorded should have a proper documentation and the supporting documents. Alright, physical control over assets and records. So the company also should have a proper control on their assets, such as the total of the assets, and then how do they is actually to make sure that all the assets are in a good condition, is not being misused by the staff and so on. Alright, and then independent checks on record. So it means that here, if the company, for example, have their own internal department, it shows that they have a independent check, or maybe independent check is come from the owner, comes from the supervisor and so on. Alright, last one is monitoring. So monitoring is actually a process to assess the effectiveness of the internal control. So we monitor whether the system is good or not good. So it involves evaluating and the design and operation of control and taking corrective action when necessary. When you can see like the top level management, they can see there is a loophole in the system, so they have to take a corrective action. So management may monitor controls through ongoing activities such as supervisory, supervise all the activities, and the separate evaluation. Alright, and then separate evaluation, some sort like the customers complain, and nowadays we can see that everything they should the customers, they should fill out a form, online form, whether they are satisfied with the services given by the company or not. Alright, last one will be internal control also contribute to the monitoring process, such as internal control. Of course, they contribute for the monitoring, so it means that they can see the loophole. So this is the summary of the 5 components of internal control and subcomponents that we discussed just now. Number 1 is control environment. Number 2 is risk assessment, control activities, information and communication and monitoring. So this is the keywords that we discussed. Alright, so characteristic of a good internal control system. So we must know what is actually characteristic in order to have a good internal control system. Alright, so it's an alternative for those who like to remember the keyword. Is can come from MOSSPAPA, most Papa. So for those who already easily can remember, you can use your own technique. Alright, number 1, for a good internal control system, the first characteristic is management perform independent check on performance. So it means that here the management will review on the adequacy of the internal control system need to be performed on regular basis to ensure all significant controls are operating effectively. So it means that here they are going to review, either it can be yearly, every 6 months. So they, as the management, they would like to review whether they need to change or is already enough for the current system. All right, so for example here, personnel are likely to forget or intentionally fail to follow procedures, or they may become careless unless someone regularly observe and evaluate their performance. So it means like sometimes they don't want to follow the rules, all right, and then sometimes they are careless and so on. So it means that, so this is also they have to see. All right, organizational structure. So management creates an organization, so structure to facilitate, such as the delegation of the duties. So it means that here, how do they delegate the responsibilities, and then coordination of activities, how do they coordinate between one to another, and then how do they control of its employees, because such organization structure should be clearly defined by the hierarchy to show who is responsible for what area of organization and official title of the person in charge. So it's here like organization chart. So here we can see who is the superior, who will be the down level, the person should be report to who. All right, next one will be segregation of duties. Means that duties between staff in charge of authorization on transaction, recording and custody of asset. As a result, no one person see the transaction through from the beginning to the end of their own. So it means that here, if I would like to give you an example, if one person who can purchase by himself is not being authorized by someone, and then the person also can make payments, so it means that here most probably they can commit fraud in order to purchase for themselves. All right, so segregation of duties, it means that the person who authorized, the person who record and custody for the asset should be different person. Next one is the supervision. So supervision should be carried out on a regular and continuous basis. So supervision is very important, because why? For example, work done by a clerk must be supervised by his or her superior or supervisor in charge. So it means that what they do, it should be supervised by other people to see whether they are follow the rules or not follow the rules. Alright, so next one will be physical control over assets and records. So of course, in a company, they should have a physical control to make sure that the custody of the asset. Alright, the use of physical precaution prevent unauthorized access to physical assets. So some sort like is there any unauthorized asset for the company's asset? Some sort like it's being misused by the top level management or by the staff. And then unauthorized access and alteration to document and record. So it means that here, who are the person can manipulate and alter all the documents and so on. So make sure that they have the control over asset and record. So not necessarily, for example, for those who are doing accounting, it's not only one person can do and can authorize everything in the system. Should be they only key in and being authorized by other people. For example, here in the notes given example, cash kept under lock and key, security document kept in a fireproof safe, inventories kept in a storeroom. So it means that here all those things, all the assets, for example, should have place for the cash, and then the document also, for example, all the important documents should be in a fireproof safe. So make sure that if anything happen, the document is still safe. Alright, arithmetic and accuracy. So these transactions are correctly and accurately recorded and processed. So make sure that there is no wrong calculate for the figures and so on. For example, adequate chart of account system, procedures manual, preparation of bank reconciliation, all right, journals, purchase journals, and control accounts. So this one should be everything should be in a accurate. All right, next one will be personnel hiring and training policy. So the company should employ competent and honest staff beside being qualified. So nowadays it's quite difficult to find the honest staff, right? To competent, it means that we are able to get the competent, whether they are knowledgeable enough to do this kind of work. So training program should be conducted for a new recruitment as well as experienced staff. So it means that here, maybe for the we are going to change for a new system for a company. Make sure that all the staff that related should have a training program. Otherwise also it's like. The things cannot be done smoothly. All right, example policy that only qualified individuals are employed. For example, we should have to take a person who have in the right knowledge for the right position. All right, authorization and approval, only valid transactions are recorded. So it means that if the transaction is valid, so that one is recorded. It's not valid, then that one should not be recorded. So transactions performed according to management general or specific authorization. Unless all the thing has been authorized, then they can keep it. For example, policy that cash payment, for example, if the payment for the company is more than 10K, and it should be authorized by or approved by the 2 officers instead of 1 officer, because if only one officers if only one officer in charge, is easy for them to commit fraud. All right, inherent limitations. So these are the things that we cannot split from the internal control, so that we cannot so this one is comes together with the internal control. So this is the limitation. All right, number 1 is the internal control can only provide reasonable assurance that management objectives are attained. So it means that only provide reasonable assurance, but the internal control are effective in reducing errors and fraud to a certain extent due to inherent limitation. That is, for example, circumvention of control where management override the internal control. So the management, they set the system, but then they are the person who override the system. So it means that it's quite difficult sometimes to trace. All right, and then collision among employees and with the third parties, for example, kickbacks. So it means that they are agreed with the third party among the employee themselves to make fraud. All right, the third one is personal errors or mistake. It means that negligence or human error. So this one cannot be avoided. All right, cost constraint. So cost versus benefit derived from the control must be justify the cost of having staff with incompatible functions. So it means that here sometimes it's quite difficult for the company to see, to pay for the cost versus with the benefit that they derive. So if they have a cost constraint, is some sort like is a big huge or something that have to think about it. All right, so internal control procedures may become inadequate or obsolete due to changes in the company size and activities. If the changes in activities, changes in the procedure, so it means that here the internal control procedures before that it could be inadequate. All right, next one, management concern about internal control. So this is the importance of internal control to management. We can see now, we would like to see how the management is actually react on the internal control. Do they really concerned or not really concerned? So internal control provides a way of management to meet its agency responsibility. So it means that here they would like to see their responsibility to the shareholders. So internal control system ensures that the info generated for decision making purpose are reliable. So it means that if the system is good, so decision making can be relied on. All right, effective internal control system can provide management with reasonable assurance that assets are safeguarded. So it means that everything is being taken care of because of the system is good. All right, safeguard from unauthorized use or disposition, that the financial records are reliable to permit the preparation of the financial information. Alright, so importance of internal control to the auditors. So what is the auditor's concern? Right, the first thing is the auditor have to understand the internal control system of an entity in planning the audit. So by right, each of the client that we are going to audit, the internal control system of the company is different. Before we do our audit, we have to understand their system first before we plan for our audit. So if the internal control system is wrong, so of course the financial statement and other data generated by the entity are more reliable. Since the system is good, they follow the procedures and everything, so we think that we can rely on the system. Alright, and thus the auditor could possibly reduce substantive tests. So it means that here, if the system is good, we can reduce our test. Why? Because they follow the system. Only we can reduce our substantive test, so it can give the same conclusion. Alright, even though if the internal control is weak, so the auditor need to perform substantive tests and detailed checking during the audit. So if the system is not good, we cannot rely on the system ready. So what we have to do is we have to do thoroughly checking. Alright, reason for auditor to understand the internal control system is number one, to obtain info about the integrity of the management. So we have to understand the system first because we would like to know the integrity of the management. If the management integrity is good, of course they would like to carry on the system. Right, next one, to obtain info about the nature and the extent of available records and document. Okay, we can see whether the records that they have in the company, whether they have a full record, the extent of the record, how how detailed they keep the records in order to do one of the transaction. Next one, to identify the type of potential errors and fraud that might affect the financial system. So we also have to know the potential errors of fraud that might affect. Okay, and next one, to assess the control risk, and then to plan and design the appropriate audit test. So if already assess the risk, the control risk, and then we can plan and design the test that we would like to do. So ISA265, auditor needs to inform the client on any material internal control weaknesses identified during the audit. That is a call letter of weaknesses. So here, this is the letter that if we can see the loophole in the system, so we can inform in the letter. Alright, so who is going to responsible to maintain the internal control system? Is that the management or is that the auditor? So auditor will evaluate and ascertain the internal control system in deciding the level of testing required. So the auditor should understand first, and then they have to evaluate whether the system is good or not good. So if they see that the system is good, they can reduce their substantive testing. But if the system is not good, so it means that you have to do your thoroughly checking. And we reduce the amount of work, audit work required. So you can see here from your conclusion. So as a conclusion, we can say that the auditor's responsible is to understand the internal control system of the client. Alright, so the relationship of the internal control and audit evidence, alright. Effective internal control reduce planned audit evidence in the audit of financial statement. So it means that here, if the internal control system of a company is effective, so the depth of the sampling test can be reduced. Right? For example, good internal control. Second dot, good internal control system, less audit evidence to be collected. Why only less audit evidence? Because the info or the financial data resulted from the client internal control system is more reliable. So it means that when we can trust the system, so we don't have to do thoroughly checking. So auditor may rely on the client's internal control system if the internal control system is strong. Alright, now we move on to the assessment and documentation understanding of the client internal control system. So auditor normally or usually document the understanding of the design of the internal control system in. So it means that here, after the auditor understand the situation of the internal control of a company, so what they have to do is they have to document the internal control system in their file. So there are three methods here. Number one is based on narrative or description, narrative description. Number two is based on the ICQ or internal control questionnaires. It's based on the questionnaires or list of question or checklist. And the third one is based on the flowchart or a diagram. Right now, what is narrative? So narrative is actually a written description of the client internal control system. So it means that write in sentences. So a proper narrative of an accounting system and related procedures include 4 characteristics that you should have in order to do your narrative. Right, number one, the origin of every document and recording in the system. So you have to state the document, who is prepared the document, and then the recording in the system, and then all processing that take place. So it means that how do they process the document sent to where and everything. So description of every document and record in the system. So they have to describe also the documents that related. And then the filing documents, so where are the documents is going to be filed and then sent to who, either to customers or destroying them should be shown. Alright, advantage, we using the client using narrative is simple to use and easy to describe, but it also has have a few disadvantages. Number one, difficult to describe details in a large organization internal control system. So when the when the client company is too large and the system is too complex, so it's quite difficult to explain, and then difficult to interpret and understand. Right, so now they gave us the examples of a description of part of sales accounting system. So now we are going to look in the sales system. So what would be the narrative description? All right, have a look over here. So the shipping department, based on approved sales order, so when they have the sales order which has been approved, so they have to prepare 3 copies shipping document when a shipment is made. So the distribution of the documentation is as follows. So the first thing what they have to say is what kind of document that they prepare, and then how many copy, and then the document is going to send to who. Right, number one, send to customer. The first copy, all right, will send to the customer with good as a packing slip. So 1 copy was sent to the customer. The second copy will be forwarded to the account receivable record keeping. So it means that here this is to record as a sales. Number 3, in the billing department. So the billing department uses shipping document to prepare 2 copies sales invoice with the following distribution. So it means that here the billing department will use the shipping. So it means that the goods already shipped to the client, so they have to prepare invoice to send to the client because already send the goods to the customer. Alright, so how many copies that you would like to prepare? Which is 2 copies. Alright, number 1 is sent to the customer for the invoice. Alright, number 2, forward to the account receivable record keeping. So make sure that this one will have in their account in the client's receivable account receivable. Okay, so this one will be filed according to numerically, so based on the alphabet. The third one, the account receivable keeping function, periodically match sales invoice with the shipping documents received as follow. So it means that here, in order to make for a payment, so what the accounting department do is they should match the sales invoice. So it means that the amount that they charge to the customer and posted to the receivable ledger. And number 2, you have to match the invoice and shipping, and they are filed alphabetically by the customer's name. So this is the examples of narrative. You have to state what kind of document, who prepare, send to who, where to keep, and so on, the process and so on. Alright, the second one will be internal control questionnaire. So this is a set of series of questions about control in the each audit area, including the control environment. So the question is only require yes or no, right? So there will be two answers, yes or no. So the use of the questionnaire is highly desirable for understanding the client system, whilst it's become a useful checklist to remind auditor of many different type of control that should exist, right? For example, here, okay, the example will be as below. All right, so this one will allows auditors to work in efficient manner. It is uneconomical to record every findings of audit job in writing. So it shows that this is the shortcut one. Right, so this is the example of the ICQ or questionnaire, right, in the sales department. Number one, are all sales orders approved by the credit department before they are accepted? For example, here, whether the sales that we are going to approve, whether whether all the credit sales being approved by the credit department. So if they are being approved by the credit department, it shows that they can borrow from our company. All right, number two is the credit approval function separated from other sales, cash, and accounting function to make sure that whether the company has the segregation of duties. If the answer is yes, it shows that's a good. But if the answer is no, it shows that it's not good. And sometimes the answer will be not available. So it means that this kind of system will not exist in the company. So this is the example of the ICQ. The rest I think that you can read by your own. Right, flowchart. So what is a flowchart? So flowchart is actually a symbols to create diagram of information system and control activities. So common flowchart symbols. So we have in page 351. So advantages of creating flowchart. So this is a graphic presentation. A series of related processing steps is easier to understand than a long narrative description. So it means that here when we see the flowchart, we are able to understand clearly. However, if flowcharts include all document and information flows in the system, it may become too complex to understand easily, and significant control activities can be difficult to identify. So in such a complex system, sometimes it's quite difficult to understand. Alright, so page 352, it shows the portion of the sales information system. Okay, have a look here. They are going to use this kind of symbol, magnetic disk, magnetic tape. So this kind of where are they going to save all this document. Alright, manual operation, display, offline, on page, means that continued from the previous page. They are keying all the documentation. So this is the stop or interrupt. How do they process? So this is the symbol. And then the decision. So for example, they have to make a decision. So this is the document prepared by the company, and this is the online storage. Okay, have a look. So this is the examples of the flowchart. Can we have a look on the order entry? So when the order entry, so the customer order, internal sales order. So they have to prepare 3 copies of the sales order, and then make sure that from the credit department, the sales order, they have to check for the credit approval. So if the credit approval is granted, so have a look, 1 copy of the sales order will be filed by the customer according to alphabet. P stand for the permanent file. So it means that here this kind of process will be saved in the permanent file. And what about A is for the alphabetic filing. So all this one will be saved according to the customer's alphabet. So it means that we have the clients normally will have more than one customer, so they will sort according to alphabet. So when we look at the shipping department here, so sales order number 2 is sent to the shipping department. So the shipping department, once they receive the customer order, they are going to prepare a bill of lading. So now they have to prepare bill of lading 3 3 copies, and then the shipping order document, the 2 copies is over here. All right, so they have to shipping order. All right, so this one they will be filed, and the bill of lading is actually a document that copy to obtain customer signature. So they are going to send together with the goods, and the rest also in the invoicing document. We are going to study detail in the next department. So this is the examples of the flowchart. I think that the flowchart is easier for us to see the linkage and the flow. Alright, evaluation of the client's internal control system. Alright, so what the auditor should do, they should update and evaluate auditors' previous experience with the entity. So they have to evaluate, update and evaluate. So it means that if there are any changes, the auditor should update also. Alright, make inquiries of the client personnel. If sometimes they would like to ask for something, whether this is good or bad, so they can inquire to the client. Alright, so they are going to examine the client's document and record, alright, to see whether they follow is good or not, whether they have the controlling system or not, and then they have to observe the client procedures, activities, operation. So what they have to do is to observe on the activities and the procedures, whether they follow or not. Alright, perform walkthrough tests of the accounting system. That is, what the auditor should do is trace few transaction from the initiation to the final recording. So start from the source document, they have to trace until to the financial statement. So either they have correctly transferred to the right journal and so on. Alright, next one for the auditing standard, the ISA315 ISA260 require the auditor to communicate to those charged with governance as soon as practicable material weaknesses. So it means that here if the auditor find out there is some material weaknesses in the operation, so what they have to do is they have to communicate. Alright, so communicate in what? They have to communicate in the management letter, stated in the management letter. An optional letter written by the auditor to the client's management containing the auditor's recommendation for improving any aspect of the client's business. Alright, so the auditor can prepare the management letter stated the recommendations for the improving if the auditor finds out that there is a loophole of the system. Alright, number 2 is the director's statements on the internal control. So under the listing requirement of the Bursa Malaysia, Securities Berhad, listing requirements. So it means that here, listed companies to include a statement of the internal control in the annual report. So it means that here they have to state all these things in their annual report. So companies or external auditor must review the statement on the internal control report, internal control and report also the result to the board of directors. So this is the details of the management letter. So letter by the auditor. So who prepared the letter is actually from the auditor sent to who? To the management. So it stated the weaknesses in the internal control, the operation of the system which may come in his attention. So while doing his work, so when we do the understanding of the system, so if they find something, so they have to state in the management letter. So in this letter also, they can explain the significance and the effect on the current and the future financial statement, and also make suggestion as the ways these weaknesses can be improved or reduced. Alright, so content of management letter. So it should state the purpose of the letter, the purpose of the internal control investigation, disclaimer or clause that weaknesses notified are not necessarily all the weaknesses may be exist, right? They also have to state the weaknesses, recommendation for improvement, and then request info on remedial action. And last one is a summary. So internal control system is important for the effective operation of the entity. So it means that if the internal control system is good, so you can see that there is an effective operation. So management has the responsibility to design, implement and maintain the internal control system. So this is the responsibility of the management. So what is the responsibility of the auditor is to understand on the system. So the auditor must obtain an understanding of the internal control structure to effectively plan the audit work. Alright.